that
choose.
too. Okay, I think we have a question in the very back, but stand up and speak very loudly, please.
This is about safety. I'm just wondering whether any of the food that we grow to turn into fuel, has anybody investigated any variations if it's based on genetically modified food?
Okay,
Corn,
let's
soy.
let Ron. Do you have an answer to that?
Most the corn that farmers grow for ethanol is the same as the corn they're growing for all of the other purposes. If you're a farmer, you grow corn and you sell it to whoever you can get the most money from, whether that's a livestock operation, an ethanol plant, or an elevator that can use it later. There's not a specific corn grown for ethanol or for livestock feed. There is a difference in, the corn that we use for corn on the cob that we eat is completely different than what we're talking about, and it's a very small, I don't even know the percentage, I think 4%, 5% of the corn, and it might be less than that we use is for human consumption. Most of the modifications for corn over the past 10 years have been drought resistance, try and make sure that if we have a drought, the corn still doesn't die, it goes dormant and then it starts growing again. There have been some versions of corn that they've tried to grow with a greater starch content, but have found that that's not necessarily good for cattle. So there aren't necessarily, there are farmers who might grow that because they know they're going to sell it to an ethanol plant. The ethanol plants value starch more than they do fat and fiber and protein. But otherwise, all of the corn that's used for ethanol is the same corn that goes into the rest of the fuel supply. So they have to, any modifications, if you remember the GMO thing that happened with European corn there, they have all the same abilities to distinguish if genetically modified corn comes out, because the stuff that we don't use to make ethanol goes back into the food supply. So we have to follow all of the same rules that anybody does who sells corn to livestock producers.
Okay, we got it.
Now, I'm not speaking as NGV now. I'm talking about, my wife's in the business. She's a lawyer in the natural foods business. And so by osmosis, I hear a lot. You can't control GMO stuff. The pollen goes in the air and goes everywhere. So the answer is we've lost control of that. And if it's a problem, if we all grow two heads in 3 or 4 decades, well, then we'll say, gee, we're sorry. But right now, we've lost control of that, and there's no way to separate that out, really.
I'd be a lot more than sorry.
I think if I have 3 heads, I know I can be a lot more than sorry.
And keep in mind, and keep in mind that 25% of the items on the shelf have corn products in it. High fructose corn syrup is in everything.
Do we have I think you have been waiting, you down here, you've been waiting so patiently, thank you.
All right. I think my question is, to what extent might it be the case that one part of the country, say the Midwest, rich in corn and so forth, where it might make sense for a certain part of the country to utilize something that works in their region, it isn't trucked all over and so forth and so on. Also, items of scale that might make sense for an individual farmer to have access to use ethanol on his or her farm, et cetera, but it might not make a whole lot of sense in Tucson. We have a lot of sunlight. So to what extent, when companies who tend to grow, tend to want to expand their market share, how much are they willing to accept the fact that what they might be promoting might have a use, in one region, but perhaps not really
Do you know?
to the benefit of all in another.
And I'm going to let them answer, but I just because I get asked this question a lot, and I do a lot of promotion of all types of alternative fuels, and the one thing that I want to remind you guys, and I believe in growing in each region what grows best in that region for that feedstock, and I think that's a really good point. However, I just want to also remind you guys, we don't make gasoline here in Tucson, Arizona. We rail it in, we truck it in, and so we're, you know, the gasoline that we're using every day is also railed in, trucked in, and it's not railed in and trucked in from this country typically, but from other countries. So keeping in mind that, at a minimum, and I promote alternative fuels to reduce dependence on foreign oil, not for their quality purpose, but to reduce dependence. But I think that we also want to keep in mind that, at a minimum, we're using a product that's made here in the U.S. and not railed in, trucked in, and shipped over the high seas from other countries. So, at a minimum. And then you guys can go ahead and answer. Absolutely. Let's start over here. Let's let you guys start first, and then we'll get to them.
We actually have done a huge amount of analysis to try to figure out what makes the most sense regionally. And if you, in fact, even if you go and you look at where alternative fuel stations are, and you just take a look across the country, scatter plot of where natural gas stations are and where ethanol stations are, where biodiesel is available, you see a ton of regionality that naturally just develops. Because there's a huge challenge of distributing fuel. You have a feedstock of ethanol in one place, and how we distribute that is a major, major challenge to get it universally across the country. And, you know, in some ways, that's why we want to do corn ethanol, even if we think cellulosic is the end game 10 years from now, because we got to learn how to do all that stuff. How do we distribute it? What makes the most sense? In my opinion, the biggest challenge to doing regional fuels really lies within the auto industry. So the model we have of the auto industry is that you have to sell 15 million vehicles to make money, right? Auto industry is really an assembler of vehicles. So mass production makes money. And the Raj guy will disagree because they make money on small numbers. But in general, the U.S. auto manufacturers make money on mass production of vehicles. So when you start to say, we just want 100,000 vehicles that are perfect for biodiesel over here, and 1 million vehicles that are perfect for ethanol over here, and 10 million vehicles that are perfect for something else over here, all of a sudden that model starts to break down. So I'm sort of optimistic that maybe with the restructuring of an auto industry, we could start to see some regional types of fuel opportunities start to happen. You know, who knows if we can or can't. But it is really difficult for them to come along with the fuel and make a profit selling only 100,000 or 200,000 of these vehicles in other different places.
Okay, let's go to you two, and then we'll go to them. I think
So this is slightly off topic, and I do agree with regionality, but something that is everywhere where people are is waste. And I'm kind of a waste geek, so I like to talk about this a lot. You've already heard about, you know, what I think of fat, oil, and grease. But I also focus on organics, and as you can make biogas out of that, biomethane. So another thing that we could do everywhere is take our food scraps, and composting is a great thing as well, so we can't stop doing that, but also use our food scraps to create biomethane through anaerobic digestion, which can be done at our wastewater treatment plants, or you can have standalone digesters. So I think that's also an option where, because waste is everywhere, and there are many reasons we need to deal with it. Landfills, also organic waste actually has a large impact on climate change that a lot of people don't necessarily make the connection, as methane is 72 times more potent than CO2 on a 20-year time scale.
Let's let her talk.
And then
Let's
23 on a 100-year time
Let's
scale.
let her talk.
So you can, a lot of people are looking at what time scale to use. So, you know, you can talk about that later. I'm not a scientist necessarily, so, but I just think waste is something we do need to think about as well.
And I think I'm glad you said that, because I just also want to let people know that there are a lot of production facilities that are looking at these options as well, because our local ethanol manufacturing facility in Casa Grande is looking at anaerobic digestion as part of what they use to produce ethanol. So, I mean, I just think that's fantastic, and as we grow, I mean, we're going to see some exciting things. Do we want to go here now?